Welcome back to MOTN After Dark, where me, your co-host with the most, Mike G, sits and waxes poetic about some pop culture ideas and concepts that some may deem a bit risque, a little too much spice in the curry, as it were. And these are just things that happen to come to mind that just wanted to take a second to talk about and really wrap my brain around and give my opinions on. As you see from the title of this episode, this time we're talking about adult animation and its effect on pop culture in general throughout the years, throughout, I would say, the American pop culture renaissance, which started back, I would say, in the 1920s, the 1910s. Everybody's, back then, you still had films like, I would say, Nosferatu coming to these shores and kind of creating the culture of popular entertainment. May it be old-timey radios or some form of silent film into television. And then that evolved into animation, where some of the earliest animation I remember is back in the old Steamboat Willie days, the old Disney stuff, and even some of the old Fleischer Superman stuff where we finally got color. But what I wanted to talk about this time around is adult animation. And when you say something like adult animation, you automatically think of mature content that's deemed unfit for the consumption of children and adolescents. May it be gratuitous nudity or cursing, vulgar language, or acts of extreme violence. Now, this used to be the norm, and this used to be enough to give you a PG-13 or R rating. But this has changed throughout the years. Kids are allowed to see a lot more crazy things, but it's kind of come full circle, where when we first started as kids, animation was not taken seriously. So a lot of adult animation kind of slipped through into homes, unbeknownst of the parents, for these young, impressionable minds to absorb and I would say motivate and influence a generation. And films I think about in regards to this infiltration of mature content is films that are super old. The earliest one I can think of is like Fritz the Cat. And for those who are unfamiliar with Fritz the Cat, it's pretty much about the anthropomorphic animals in New York City. And it has highly sexual overtones. I think it even has drug use. It's a pretty hardcore cartoon or animation. But back then, parents didn't take animation seriously. So there's a high chance that they just bought it for their kids because they had a cartoon cat on the front and didn't really pay attention to the material because they didn't watch them. It was for their kids to watch. So you found little Timmy watching a cartoon bunny, do some pretty raunchy things. And another movie that makes me think of a mature tone or connotation to animation is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And there's nothing really intense that goes on the surface of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. But if you really stop and think about it, the film deals with some pretty serious adult-themed content, such as infidelity, murder, and the gentrification of Toontown, building the railroad or the freeway, as it were, burning right through the little town. And there were some pretty gnarly things in Who Framed Roger Rabbit now that you look back at it. And one of the main things I really want to talk about is kind of remembering watching these things as a kid and all the jokes that went over your head. And it just didn't even register. Roger, there was a certain question online on Twitter, Adam Nerdiverse, where they were asking, who is your earliest cartoon crush as a kid? And mine was actually Jessica Rabbit. why don't you do right like the other men do? Her introduction was like, okay, that was the part in little Mikey Short Pants' brain that switched on, was like, okay, girls, women, I guess. And that whole film was just patty cake, being so upset about patty cake. I just didn't get it as a kid. Watching horrific things on the film, like Christopher Lloyd's character, I forget his name. I think it's, I'm not going to even try to guess. I don't remember. But that scene where he shows him what the dip is, and it's like the only thing that can kill a tune, because tunes are pretty much immortal and don't take injury. So he takes this cartoon shoe and slowly dips it in, might as well just be acid. And you just hear the actual tune screaming in agony as it melts away. And then the dip spills on the ground, and it's just the most disturbing thing ever. You know what I mean? Just one of those movies that, looking back, is like, I shouldn't have been watching that. I think that movie kind of warped a lot of kids' minds in regards to content versus substance for animation. Because when you're a kid, animation is not supposed to be that heavy. But then, speaking of heavy, I remember as a young kid watching the I would say adult animations that you weren't supposed to have. A big one that I remember very fondly is Heavy Metal. And this was an animation that was like almost like an anthology of short stories that revolved around one central kind of MacGuffin, which was this green orb. It was almost like a Lovecraftian story. But Heavy Metal was so cool and not supposed to be watched because there was nudity in it and drugs and blood and all animated and all with this killer score and soundtrack. And I remember not having it because my parents knew better, but having that buddy, you know what I mean? You always have that friend who has a copy at their house and it's like, hey, we're going to go in here and watch some X-Men. But nah, he just puts in Heavy Metal. And we're just like, wow, super not supposed to be watching that. But another movie that we did have in my household that I think my mother bought it or my dad, and was Fire and Ice. That's an old school one. If you've never watched Fire and Ice, the animation, it's like almost like a Frank Frazetta painting, where it's like the barbarian with the Conan sword and his lady on his leg, just classic masculine garbage back then. But that was another one that was extremely adult, with full frontal nudity and blood and cracking skulls, all beautifully animated. And that was one that I would watch, and it was just a little too much for me as a kid. It was almost like there was that time in my life where I wasn't ready for horror, and seeing things that were too hardcore kind of just threw me away until I became a monster kid. With the advent of Thriller and Jaws and Nightmare, and my first viewing of the Night of the Living Dead. But there was a time where it's just a little too much. Watching Fire and Ice was a little too heavy for little Mike back then. And I just can imagine how many households that movie snuck in because it looked like a Saturday morning cartoon. And it just kind of trips me out that a lot of these adult animations slip through the cracks because there was that time in the 80s and 90s where parents didn't know. And with the 90s came the advent of Japanese animation, which is the most adult stuff ever. That's why I was introduced to things like Vampire Hunter D, which wasn't that heavy, but it was still not for kids. Vampire Hunter D is super not for kids. I remember my friend having the anime tape with Wicked City on it. If you've never seen Wicked City and you're in an anime, ay chihuahua, have fun with that one. And watching things like Elfenlied and Cutie Honey and La Blue Girl, just like things you aren't supposed to watch, as a kid. But there's always avenues. There's always avenues to watch these things, either through friends or sometimes through family. It was kind of weird that these tapes would just be floating around the house. And my earliest introduction to Japanese animation was Sailor Moon. I remember that was the first anime I kind of watched, and it was just like, wow, this is better. This is better quality than the American stuff we were getting. And I didn't know what anime was. I just knew that this pseudo girl cartoon was serious and serious things were happening, and there was repercussions in Sailor Moon. And that was before Dragon Ball. That was before Rama 1.5 and Poltergeist Reports and Yu Yu Hakusho. It was Sailor Moon. That was my start to like anime. And anime has always been that bridge between adult animation and just raw kids funness. You know, it's always tapered that line, especially the more mainstream stuff. And then you have movies like Akira, that was super just mature. You know, there's a legit almost like rape scene in that. It's just too much, and the concepts were too high for my little brain that just wasn't really understanding what was on the screen. But I just knew that it was far from Thundercats and the Transformers. Very mature stuff back then, you know, and these things that you absorb and kind of helped influence pop culture. And then there's the more American stuff. You know, I remember watching Cool World as a kid with Kim Basinger, and I think Brad Pitt's in that. It's one of his earlier films. And just being like, this is almost too much. This is the bridge between adolescence, you know. It's like blurring that line between you're a boy becoming a young man at the same time, or, you know, in the other cases, like girl becoming a lady, and you see these things and it's so familiar, but yet so alien because it's making you feel things that your little brain isn't ready to process. You know, at the time, speaking personally, I'm not sure. Of course, if you're ready, you know, rock and roll, but watching something like Cool World, where it was blending that line, was almost like a gut check. It was almost like an emotional gut check for me. Because I was like, I know this is cool, but it's tickling parts of my brain that was never tickled before, you know. And, you know, there's other sides to that. Like, I remember this one movie with this comedian named Robin Harris. It was called Bebe's Kids. That's a super good one, where it's not as heavy as some Japanese animation or heavy metal, but it wasn't meant for kids. It was nothing to make a kid laugh. It was Robin Harris pretty much doing his raunchy comic relief, you know, shtick, but in animation form. And he had to watch these three bad kids, and they went to some kind of theme park, and Robin Harris is on a date, but Robin Harris's like ex-girlfriend was there, and they're all hood radish and just not for kids, man. And that's another one I would recommend watching. If you've never seen Bebe's Kids, that's a trip. Movie with her lead press-on nails. I gotta watch that again. And pretty much also makes me think of things like Beavis and Butthead Do America, which was Beavis and Butthead's one and only, like the end of the Beavis and Butthead era, where they had a feature film that they can do a little bit more, because Beavis and Butthead was one of those shows that I was on the cusp of, like the MPAA and the government really putting a lock on things that can be shown on television at certain times. And for those who grew up around that time, you remember how much of a issue Beavis and Butthead was, because, you know, kids were actually starting fires because they heard Beavis said it or whatever. I believe they were going to start fires no matter what. But Beavis and Butthead was the scapegoat. So a lot of that show was toned down for many years until the actual film came out, and Beavis can go fire. I don't feel like doing it too extreme, because this is a chill After Dark episode, but you get the point. The show was not meant for children at all. And that kind of makes me think of the influences these films have had on popular culture. How has this kind of material affected the creators of the stuff today? And you see echoes of that in South Park. You see echoes of that in Family Guy, of the culprit being the blending of realities almost between childlike glee and animation and serious adult things. Like something like Graves of the Fireflies, like the most tragic anime I've ever seen in my life, but it's animated into a child. It may at first seem like something bright and fun, but you sit down and watch it for more than 5 seconds, And you might as well be watching Apocalypse Now, freaking animated version of Requiem for a Dream. You know what I mean? And I think that a lot of current culture has a lot to be thankful for in regards to these adult animations that slip through the cracks, that somehow these young people were influenced by, and then kind of melted into all forms of popular culture, from video games to television to music, you know. And just growing up in that era before the internet and before everything was at the push of a button, you would beg your mom to rent it. You know what's up because you heard it on the schoolyard, but you're hoping your mom wouldn't catch that, you know, Ghost in the Shell or, you know what I mean? Or, what's another good one? I would say, just for the sake of the fluidity of the episode, wanting to rent heavy metal and them not knowing the deal. And you get home and your parents like, oh, let's watch it together. You're like, no, Mom, I'll watch this later. You guys go chill. Just tell her to go somewhere. You cut on it. You hear that rock music start playing. You're like, yeah, we're in there. So that's pretty much like my low-key, high-key thoughts just on adult animation. And how it affected me personally is, like I said, it was kind of that bridge for me between being a kid and becoming a young man. Just kind of that redirection of thought, because it was bridging two things, that where I was from and where I was going. You know what I mean? In regards to what I thought was cool or interesting or fun to versus what I would soon grow to love and admirize. Because I got to tell you, I was always a little artist growing up, and after watching something like Vampire Hunter D, that's all I was drawing. I was drawing D, and I was drawing Dracula and the mutant that can twist space around him and all that cool stuff. And always having those tapes, still those old VHSs floating around, you know, even as a young adult. Who doesn't want to sit and watch Akira, you know, or who doesn't want to break out, you know, Who Framed Roger Rabbit or Baby's Kids or Cool World, all these. A Scanner Darkly, for that matter, is still animation. And that's a pretty heady movie. You know what I mean? Are there any, I would say, adult animations that I left out? Any that were your favorite? What was the adult animation that caught your eye when you were a kid? Please let me know on our Twitter, which is at Nerdiverse, where I, Mike G, and Winter, and with Chashmonk the Thizzard, we all have a blast on our Twitter. We would love to hear from you, especially in regards to this topic, because I believe that this is a very interesting topic that I don't hear a lot of people talk about all the time. So I'm definitely excited to get your take on it. And if you would like more of this content, please let us know on whichever podcasting platform that you're listening to this on. May it be iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, SoundCloud, YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spreaker. I said that already. Spotify. Leave us a like, comment, let us know what you think. Let us know what you remember, and subscribe to our channel, because I like doing these MOTN After Darks. It's kind of just a quick little thing I'm putting together, and I'm having a blast with it so far. So please let me know if you like this content. If you have any suggestions to a risque pop culture topic that you would like me to cover or give my little 2 cents on, and I would definitely oblige you if applicable. I'm, of course, been your host, Mike G. And as always, I will ask you to turn off the lights and light a candle.